The biggest challenges that companies and TA teams are facing is how do you maintain that drive for results, that drive for winning, when the demand for your hiring might be evolving and shifting? That's a really tough needle to thread, not just for a recruiter, but for a leader who's trying to drive a winning, high-performing team.
Welcome to Offer Accepted, the podcast that elevates your recruiting game. I'm your host, Shannon Ogborn. Join us for conversations with talent leaders, executives, and more to uncover the secrets to building and leading successful talent acquisition teams. Gain valuable insights and actionable advice from analyzing cutting-edge metrics to confidently claiming your seat at the table. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Offer Accepted. I'm your host, Shannon Ogborn, and this episode is brought to you by Ashby, the all-in-one recruiting platform empowering ambitious teams from seed to IPO and beyond. I am super excited because I am here with Becky today. Becky joined HubSpot in 2015 when the company was under 1,000 employees and hiring a few hundred people a year. Today, as VP of Talent Acquisition and Mobility, she leads the teams responsible for attracting and hiring thousands globally while ensuring continued growth opportunities for employees. During her time at HubSpot, Becky has scaled the global recruiting function, launched emerging talent and executive recruiting teams, and built a people analytics function. Before HubSpot, she led experienced hire recruiting for McKinsey & Company and worked as an executive search consultant at Heidrick & Struggles. She holds an MBA from Columbia Business School, a BA in psychology from Tufts, and lives in the Boston area with her husband, 3 kids, and yellow lab. Becky is passionate about using data to drive decisions and creating an inspiring workplace. Such a great experience to join us on the podcast today. Becky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Shannon.
I know that I gave the briefest of introductions, but would love if you could give our listeners a little bit more context briefly on your role at HubSpot.
Absolutely. And I'm so thrilled to be here. So HubSpot is a software platform whose mission is to help millions of organizations grow better. And my team's job is to enable them to do that by hiring remarkable people every single day, whether it's for our go-to-market functions, helping to build our product, or helping run the HubSpot from the back end globally. We make sure that we are bringing our hiring managers the candidates they deserve to help build HubSpot's future.
Yes, I love that. So important because HubSpot is constantly growing and you've seen a lot of exciting growth. So I'm really excited to get your insights today on all of that. Obviously, you've been in the space for a while. You have great experience. I would love to hear, in this constantly evolving world of talent, what do you feel like sticks out to you as a primary issue in talent and recruiting today?
Recruiters have had it rough the past few years. I mean, you think about the mid 2010s kind of coming out of the financial crisis of 2008, when the market started to recover. Every company was growing and scaling so quickly, and recruiters were just like hire. COVID happened. We all went to working remotely, and we still had to hire. And then the world kind of dropped out from under us. And all of the behaviors that we had, it really ingrained in recruiters about driving for results and hiring really quickly and moving fast to build teams kind of went to a screeching halt. And so recruiters were kind of, either left without jobs because TA teams were the first ones to get cut coming out of 2022 and beyond. But we had to kind of shift the behaviors that really drove success. And so I think the biggest challenges that companies and TA teams are facing is how do you maintain that drive for results, that drive for winning, when the demand for your hiring might be evolving and shifting? That's a really tough needle to thread, not just for a recruiter, but for a leader who's trying to drive a winning, high-performing team.
I love the previous conversation we had when you were telling me a little bit about how this resonates at HubSpot and what you all have been doing specifically around a talent ready program. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it is and what function it serves at HubSpot?
Yeah, absolutely. So any TA leader will know that hiring is a momentum game. Your hiring machine can move so much faster and more efficiently the greater visibility, the greater runway you have on the hiring that you need to make. And that was something that was a core principle in how we built our hiring plans for years and years at HubSpot. When the market shifted and we lost that long-term visibility into how and what we needed to hire, it was really easy for us to just say, whoa, we just have to sit back and wait for hiring plans to come through, for the roles to come through. If you're an organization that's doing backfill only hiring, you're in even more of a reactive state. And so our Talent Ready program came out of a desire to control the controllables, to kind of take control of what was in our purview and think about how we can continue to build momentum, even in the absence of perfect clarity of what we needed to hire for. And so practically what that looked like is, how do we look at our roles that we know are the highest volume, most evergreen roles? And even if we don't have open headcount, how do we continue to interview for those roles and cultivate pipelines of candidates so that when an open role comes up, we have fully qualified candidates ready to go to put into a seat quickly. So you don't have that same lag time of, time to hire that a lot of companies talk about as a headwind for us.
That's amazing. And having structure around this, I'm sure, has proved to be very successful. I would love if you could help us understand, why do these things matter to talent teams? You touched on a couple of reasons just now, but like, what breaks if you aren't hiring quality candidates at the speed that you need to? It doesn't always necessarily mean quickly, because quickly isn't always the best outcome, but like, what breaks if you don't have something in place?
We talk a lot about slowing down in order to speed up and going slow in order to go fast. And HubSpot's business model in particular is one that is very, very reliant on headcount, especially in the go-to-market space. Our revenue model is a monthly recurring revenue model, which can feel very, very transactional. And so what that means is that if you have an attrition, every empty seat you have in your headcount directly can contribute to a gap in your revenue plan. And so what we recognized is that our job was to try to minimize that gap so that the business could continue to deliver on the revenue targets that it had throughout the year. And so whether it was unexpected attrition, whether it was certain pockets in attrition, or whether it was, hey, we actually want to go faster, for example, in product and R&D, how do we go really, really quickly? We wanted to be in a position where we were not reacting from a standstill. View it as like a sprint race versus a relay race. We were already running so that when the business was ready to go in whatever way, shape, or form, we could just pass the baton to them without slowing down to a complete stop.
I love that analogy. And I think what's been really helpful for me hosting this podcast and hearing so many conversations is the amount of things that and concepts we can take from other parts of the business, like marketing and sales. Sales will never stop their pipeline. There's no world where it makes sense for them to do that. And of course, it's a little bit different, but I think philosophically, like you're saying, when you cut momentum off completely, it makes it really hard to context switch to restart. So if you're constantly evolving and building something, it makes it easy to pass that baton to leadership or to the proper recruiters or to hiring managers so that they can run and get that candidate quickly, but also a candidate that is high quality and a good match for the role.
We haven't started talking about this yet, but like this took a lot of convincing, because the way you and I just talked about it, it makes so much sense. There were a lot of challenges that we had, both from hiring managers, but also as we thought about the candidate experience. And so I will say, this is not something that we implemented and on day one, it was wildly successful. We actually had a quarter or two where we didn't see great results, but we believed that it was the thing that was going to help us win in a really competitive time.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to get to these learnings. I will quickly shout out our VP of Marketing, Harriet, because she said something I think is really relevant here, which is there's what the data tells you, and then there's part of intuition that you have to lean into. Data only gives you part of the story, and it doesn't always give you the full story right away. And so there's things that we know, and you as a recruiting leader know, and talent leader know over time, where it's like, yeah, we haven't seen the results yet, but based off of what I know from my career's worth of doing this, like I have a strong intuition that this is really going to work for us. And so it's kind of an interesting thing where you really want to rely on data, but you don't want to rely on it so much that you lose that intuitive piece of what we know can work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Harriet, was it your VP of marketing? Yep. The way we talk about it is data with context. You cannot show data in absolution. It always comes with some sort of context because, by the way, we're not making widgets. We're dealing with people, and there's so much context that goes along with that. And so a huge believer in that. And I think that's what's kind of driven us to stick with this, even when it was not a home run right out of the gate.
Well, yeah, let's hear some of the learnings. I know that there's a good amount to cover here.
The first thing we realized is that we needed to really focus on the why. You cannot have a compelling program change initiative without really anchoring it to what matters most to your stakeholders. And for us, initially, this was just seen as like, hey, recruiting wants to stay busy. Recruiting wants to show that they are still able to drive results. It's so much more than that, because if we are able to minimize the reactive state and optimize the proactive state that we're in, we can adapt. Everyone, not just recruiting, we can adapt to change in the business that much easier. And so for us, recognizing that we needed to clearly ladder up to the why and the organizational goals was by and large our biggest learning. And so what our team did is we created a lot of mechanisms around reporting. As we thought about productivity of our teams, we started factoring in this Talent Ready program when historically we didn't. And that was a big learning for us. And then I think the two that I think were the greatest were, how do we get your hiring teams on board with this? And then we can talk about the candidate side of things. On the hiring team side of things, one of the things that this required, one of our core principles, was getting everyone comfortable with the fact that hiring is a team sport. And everyone agrees with that in abstract. Everyone agrees with that in principle until you have to make a hire as a hiring manager without having interviewed the person that you're potentially hiring onto their team. And that was one of our core principles. This program, this initiative was only going to work if we really leaned into a more evergreen, team-oriented hiring model where we said, hey, this person we know is right for HubSpot. We don't have a role for them, but we believe that when a role comes up, we would be able to slot them into that role. And so what we found is early on, a lot of hiring managers were saying no. So our conversion rates from folks in this Talent Ready pool was pretty low because hiring managers didn't necessarily want to take a risk, quote unquote, for someone to join their team. And so it took a lot of convincing and influencing to get hiring managers on board with that.
Yeah, I think that there's always blockers on that end. My theory on this is because people come from other organizations, are used to hiring how they want to hire. And when that bit of control is removed even for the right reasons, even if there's a why, it's like a very hard thing to release for a lot of people. It is. And so you have to take a process that's going to bring them along for the ride instead of just handing it to them. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you communicated and how you ultimately were able to get people on board?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is maybe to take a step back is what was the process, giving like the highest degree of transparency into the process to get these people on board. And so let's take our engineering roles, for example. What we had to do is get really clear on a couple of things. One, that anyone who we put into our Talent Ready pool went through the exact same interview process as anyone. There was no difference in the hiring or interviewing process. What it meant is we just got to the very end of the process, the same stages, the same interview techniques, et cetera. And instead of extending someone an offer, we would say to them, hey, we don't have a role for you today, but we believe that you are a great fit for HubSpot. So when a role comes available and we will communicate to you at a regular interval, we will extend you an offer. And so I think first off, there was this misconception that folks who were sitting in Talent Ready were either lower quality candidates or went through a different process. And so we had to do a little bit of like demystifying that wasn't necessarily true. That was the first step. The second step was getting our leaders bought in, our executive leaders, to the fact that this was going to help them achieve their business goals because they were able to hit their headcount plans at a more readily available pace than anywhere else. And so once we did that, we got the buy-in at the leadership level and we did some education at the frontline hiring manager level. We started to see things really ticking up. The other thing we started to do is, I totally agree with you that there's some art and science, there's data and there's context. We started looking into the data and we looked at people who were not converting from the talent ready pool into a hire. And we said, why not? Why aren't they? And what we were able to do when we did that deep dive with our executives is to say, hey, of this list of a dozen people who didn't convert, we actually believe we should have. They were like false negatives. And so that allowed us, and going through those specific examples and diving deep, allowed us to really bring credibility to a program. And once we did some of those minor tweaks, we started to see an uptick in our conversion rate. I think the other thing that was really important is we didn't react to a week's or a month's worth of data. We looked at a quarter, a full quarter, and then we did a deep dive and a retrospective, came up with a bunch of commitments, and then continued with the iterations for another quarter to see whether it resulted in sustained improvement.
Continuous improvement is such an important part of recruiting. So I love that you all were going back, and it's not like you're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. You aren't trying to force it to work, but you want to know, more definitively through data if it's working or if it's not working. And I know you had you were talking a little bit about the conversion, and you had a really impressive result from doing all of that.
Initially, when we started doing this, we saw it was pretty abysmal. It was maybe a 20% conversion rate coming out of it. Now, if we look at our data across our product organization and our go-to-market organization, on average, it's about a 40 to 50% conversion rate. And at some months, that actually goes up to about 70%. And so we are setting a new goal where our goal is actually to have at least 70% of our talent ready candidates moving out and getting an offer. So we've seen a really tremendous uptick in just under a year of having this program. So we're really pleased with the results, and we think we can do better.
Definitely. It's amazing though, too, because I think one thing that often gets left behind when you're thinking about hiring is turnover. And although it's kind of like customer churn, even though you can anticipate some, you don't always know who it's going to be, when it's going to be. And it's at a large organization, maybe it's more predictable, but humans are unpredictable in a lot of ways, and you never know for sure. And so I feel like having that talent ready program allows you probably to fill the backfills much faster than anyone else, because when you have a headcount plan, you're like, okay, I know we're planning on hiring these, let's just say 5 roles. Oh, someone left. Now we have to fill that too. And that wasn't really precisely on our radar. So I would imagine it's pretty good for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super valuable for the evergreen roles that you're constantly hiring for. It is a total game changer when you think about using it in more niche markets. We're a global company. We have customers in so many different countries, and we serve those customers from a go-to-market perspective in a lot of different languages. And so when you think about that niche language hiring, this has been a total game changer, because you think about a Dutch-speaking sales rep, that could take months and months to hire. But if you have a pool of primed and qualified candidates vetted already, that potentially can shorten that time to hire. So it's not about being fast for the sake of being fast. It's about being efficient.
And you talked a little bit about the candidate sentiment earlier in setting expectations there. Would love if you could walk through how have candidates received this, and what do you do to really set the recruiters up for success on the candidate side versus, the internal hiring manager side?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We at HubSpot, we obsess over our customers. We also like to say we obsess over our candidates. And there was a little bit of resistance of, hey, is this fair to candidates to string them along, quote unquote, string them along in a process and give them potentially false hope when a role might not actually become available for them? And that's a valid concern. And at the end of the day, our biggest commitment to our candidates is transparency. And so rather than dial back on a program that we believed in, we doubled down on the transparency to our candidates so they understood what we were solving for. And so the same tactics we used to influence our stakeholders, we talked about that on the candidate side as well. And we said, hey, we want you're joining a winning company. And here's one way we ensure that HubSpot is always winning. Here's what the process is going to look like. So it first starts out with like deep transparency into the process. It also requires recruiters to really communicate proactively. And so we made a commitment that candidates would not be left in the dark. They would be continually getting updates. And one of the changes that we made after our kind of first quarter or two of data is we decided that a candidate had a shelf life in this program. So they were not in the Talent Ready program indefinitely. We would rotate, and it depends on the area of the business, but we developed candidate SLAs based on the area of the business. So anywhere from 30 to 90 days, if we didn't have a role for them, we would be transparent about it and they could always come back and interview with HubSpot. But we wanted to make sure they didn't feel like they were getting stringed along. And then it keeps our pool of candidates in the Talent Ready program really fresh and relevant. We also didn't want candidates to, say no to other offers. They wanted to join HubSpot, but they weren't sure if they had an opportunity. And so that transparency, both on the process and then their specific situation, were two things that we really leaned into.
Yeah, and I can't say this enough. The one thing that candidates want more of right now is transparency. Whether it's a Talent Ready program or just going through what you might consider a more standard process, people have been burned. People are bringing a lot of baggage that they did not create for themselves. And so as recruiting and talent functions navigate that, and a lot of talent and recruiting people have experienced that themselves, I feel like we have to show exponential amounts of empathy and just know that people have these experiences that have like really hurt them. And the best thing that we can do is be honest and transparent with them about the process at a very minimum.
Absolutely. I could not have said it better myself. The transparency is so key.
Well, I would love to hear if there are like any other considerations that people should take. So like if someone was trying to start this today, what do you wish that you knew that you know now that may spare somebody else a little bit of strife?
One of our biggest learnings, I shared a lot of learnings already, but as we think about how we scale this going forward, or if I were starting this over again, I think the thing that's really important is you have to think global and act local. So while we can believe that this is the right thing for HubSpot, we have to recognize that in the different markets we operate in, we have to take a little bit of a nuanced approach, whether there are regional cultural differences, functional cultural differences. An engineer might have a different perspective on sitting in a bit of a bullpen than a salesperson. And so what my team has been really amazing at doing is acknowledging how are we going to make this work for the area of the business that we support. And this allows us to really meet our candidates where they are and meet the business where they are. So I think the biggest thing I would say is if you're getting started on this, think global, act local, tie it back to the strategy of your company. So make sure that they understand how this is helping enable your company mission and strategy. And then I think the last thing is lean into the transparency with your stakeholders, transparency with your candidates. We've also used this as a great opportunity to develop some great nurturing campaigns. So even if candidates come out of the Talent Ready pool, we still keep them engaged. We still nurture them. We send them information about HubSpot so that if 6, 12, 18 months from now, they want to join again and there's an opportunity, they're much more readily willing to engage.
Yes, I love all that, especially the first bit. I think it's a big missed opportunity a lot of times when people don't think about how the role type or the geographies can really impact recruiting programs. And wouldn't it be just so nice if everything applied just unilaterally across the board, everything applies to everything? But it really doesn't. And I think especially if you have a recruiting team that's primarily in North America, those are the teams that I feel like fall into this trap the most. And even if you don't have a lot of people from a certain region on your team, like reach out to other recruiting people outside of your organization, talent people who have that insight. If you're trying to launch a new office, if you're trying to hire a bunch, if you're trying to hire people who speak multiple languages, like go to people who have done it before and ask them what has worked for you, what really hasn't landed. Because if you don't get that right, it could create a really bad perception of your business for longer than we would like, I would say.
Absolutely. Lean on your local leaders for market insight. And last thing I would say, lean on your legal team. A lot of people think about legal teams as the blocker. Our legal team was an amazing enabler of this because they were able to help us navigate even things like certain countries, you need formal letters of intent to hire, whereas other companies, it could just be a verbal commitment. And so being able to partner cross-functionally as well helped us capture learnings early and avoid missteps so that we could keep this momentum going.
Yes, so important. And I love that. Don't see them as a blocker, see them as a collaborator, because they oftentimes have more knowledge in areas that we need information in, but don't have readily available to our team. And there's one thing that we talked about that is somewhat related, but it's about candidates, your success nurturing candidates from your ATS, which is somewhat related to the Talent Ready program, getting folks into this nurturing campaigns. Can you just talk briefly about that?
Like so many companies, when we post a role, we are inundated with applications, and it can get really overwhelming for a recruiter to comb through all of those. You also see that it introduces a lot of noise into the top of your funnel. And so it's hard to parse through that. And so you're naturally seeing that your conversion rates are dropping throughout your recruiting funnel. What we've seen is we have a huge untapped opportunity to really tap into our candidates who have applied historically or have interviewed with us, who we are nurturing along the way. And we actually see that our candidates who we have nurtured for a long period of time actually convert throughout the funnel at almost a 3x higher rate than candidates who are just applying for the first time. And like so many companies, you probably have tens of hundreds of thousands, even millions of candidates in your database. Use that to your advantage in a very noisy talent market outside of your ATS. Within your ATS, you have a captive audience of people who know your company, who've already expressed interest, who are likely keeping a pulse on what's happening. And so use that to your advantage, create compelling, whether it's content or engagement, to really pull them in. It's a great way to leverage what's right at your fingertips. And so we've been not just looking at prospecting and sourcing as a great opportunity for us, but we actually goal our recruiters on nurturing as well.
I'm excited to get to your hot take here very shortly, but my hot take of the day is when you say we will reach out to you if there's another role that matches your background, mean it and do it, because it's a big missed opportunity in talent right now. And like you said, like these are people who have had interest in your company in the past, maybe high interest, maybe low interest, but at the very least, like they know that they applied for a job, which is also the importance of that elongated candidate experience. A candidate experience isn't just like, I applied to this job one time, then this job, then that job. It's like all one just elongated experience that has to be top tier in order for people to want to work for your company, which I think we're going to get to your hot take here in a second, but I would love to take a big step back and talk a little bit more on a high level, right? So at Ashby, we have a hiring excellence framework. We talk a lot about what hiring excellence means to us, but I always am so curious to know, when you hear hiring excellence, what does that mean to you?
So I will take us back to the beginning where I said we spent so much time hammering in the behavior into our recruiters that they just need to crank out offers. Like the most successful recruiters are the ones who have the highest number of offer accepts or have the highest activity. I believe hiring excellence means shifting away from thinking about output and activity to really thinking about driving better outcomes. And that starts with deeply understanding the business of the organization that you support. And so what I say to all of my recruiters, my leaders on the team, anyone, really seek to understand your organization's mission, strategy, business model, day-to-day challenges, how they measure success, like act like you're a member of the team, because that's not only going to help you source candidates that are a better fit, it's going to help you qualify them, and it's going to make you a better partner. And so for me, hiring excellence is business acumen and business context. That is what makes or breaks a recruiter, I believe.
Yes, couldn't agree more. I think that strategically recruiting is getting there more than ever before. And I would love to see that momentum just keep carrying.
Yes,
100%.
Same.
Okay, we're here. This is my favorite part of, I say this every time. This is my favorite part of every episode because I just know that our community has the best hot take. So I would love to hear, what is your recruiting hot take?
Okay, this might be unique to HubSpot, but I suspect that a lot of companies are thinking about this. We are coming out of one of the most competitive talent markets. If you think about COVID and then the Great Resignation, it was so hard to be an employer because you had to compete with everyone else who was hiring. The market has shifted and we haven't shifted our mindset. And so I think for far too long, we have thought about how we could be really be a magnet for all talent. And now, as I mentioned, we post a role overnight, we get 1,000+ applications. That is impossible for a recruiter to weed through. And it tells me that we are actually trying too hard to be a magnet for all talent. And so we need to start shifting and thinking about how we can be a filter for the right talent, and even in some cases, repel talent. And so for me, when I see us post a role and we get thousands of applications in a matter of hours, it means we're not being opinionated enough about what we need, and we're not being opinionated enough about the type of person that thrives in our organization. And so I am really imploring all of our recruiters to think about how they can be a filter for the right talent, in how they market our roles, in how they source, in how they ask questions of the candidates in their first interaction with them. I would love nothing more for our recruiters to tell a candidate why they shouldn't join HubSpot as much as why they should join HubSpot, because we want to make sure that we are bringing along the right people who not only have the skills, they have the values that align with our culture and how we get work done and how we serve our customers. So hot take, stop being a magnet for all talent, start being a filter for the right talent.
Yes, 100%. I've had a couple of conversations this year that were along those lines, where having a situation where talent is able to self-select out if there's hard stops, like if someone doesn't want to be a player coach and they just want to be a coach, they should know in the job description that this is a player coach role. And if you are just a coach and you just want to be a coach, this is not the right role for you. And all of that time that you're saving the candidate, because candidates are exhausted of applying to jobs, the time that you're saving your recruiting team to talk to somebody and find out, oh, this job's actually not for them because of this very obvious black and white thing that we could have put in the job description. There's always gray area that may require more discussion, but there's certain things that don't. And it's pretty clear. It's pretty black and white. It goes in the job description. Great. Now you can say, hey, that job's not for me, or that company's not for me. It's going to save your team more time. And I think candidates really appreciate it. And that can't be overlooked, even in a talent market where we're getting a lot of applications.
We are big subscribers to, we can attribute this to the Brene Brown quote, clear is kind. Candidates want clarity. They, more than anything else, they want transparency. They want clarity because it's a signal of respect. And so don't waste a candidate's time if you know they're not going to be the right fit for a role.
Well, I think we are coming up on our time. Where should people go to learn more about you and HubSpot?
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and to learn more about HubSpot, just go to hubspot.com/careers and you'll learn all about what it's like to work at HubSpot and where we're hiring.
Becky, thank you so much for joining us on Offer Accepted. I can't thank you enough. Your insights are going to be so valuable to our community. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to learning from others as well. So if you've tried something, others have tried something who are listening, like our Talent Ready program, and have seen successes or learnings, I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Ashby. What an ATS should be. a scalable, all-in-one tool that combines powerful analytics with your ATS, scheduling, sourcing, and CRM. To never miss an episode, subscribe to our newsletter at www.ashbyhq.com/podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.